PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies. I was first involved in this project as a research assistant, and my role evolved into kind of a more permanent role, and now at ICS. Now I am working the second year with Chris on the facilitator's guide and the workshops that it contains. We want to highlight for you a number of things, just to give you a sense of what this project is all about. Not only the research, but why having a guide like the one that you're going to see today. We did the first year of research. We gathered the results. We want to make sure that those results are communicated back to the communities in ways that are meaningful, that can actually trigger some change, that can facilitate relationships, and that's what this guide is supposed to do. Is supposed to help you kind of navigate some of the difficulties that partnerships will bring, and also will help you further what you are already doing, which many of you know what a partnership looks like, and you are on the ground doing that work. This is just meant to further that process, to allow you to engage in new initiatives of partnership, and also to just learn a little bit about each other in the faith and settlement kind of divide. We've used that word divide before, and some people feel that the word itself creates anxiety, so we don't want to say that people's faith and settlement are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. They actually collaborate, and the research has shown us that. So we want to just make sure that you know how those collaborations can happen, how what are the promising practices, and model some of that throughout our workshop. So that's kind of our inspiration for this.
Now, I want to give a little bit of background into the project itself that spawned this workshop guide and toolkit. So this is a part of a 2-year research project called Faith and Settlement Partnerships, Setting Immigrants in Canada Up to Success. This has been funded by Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, SSHRC, and has been facilitated by the Center for Community-Based Research in collaboration with 13 community partners, including universities, local immigration partners, social service agencies, and groups. Now, the way that we structured the research was around 3 specific research questions. First question was around, to what extent are faith and settlement partnerships viewed positively? This is looking at the big picture. What is the place for faith and settlement partnerships in our society and within our country? And the second one is, what types of partnerships presently exist and how could they be improved? It's looking at the structures that are currently around in terms of how they enable or are a barrier for creating faith and settlement partnerships. And then finally, with the processes, is how can effective partnerships be better facilitated, which is looking into the future, taking these structures and figuring out how to make a better environment for them to exist. Now, the first year of the project occurred from September 2016 to August 2017. It focused on 3 different research methods and 3 different projects. The first one was a survey of 73 faith leaders, practitioners, and stakeholders in Toronto, Peel Region, Waterloo Region, and London, the 4 areas in southwestern Ontario. You may have filled out this survey yourself. We also conducted a focus group in Ottawa at the Pathways to Prosperity Conference with 3 local immigration representatives from across the country. So the scope of this project is fairly narrow and specific within these 4 geographic areas, but it enables us to get down deep enough that we're able to see what's happening within these partnerships. The second product that came out of the first year of the project was a national literature review, which featured an annotated bibliography of over 50 sources, and this came from various places And the annotated bibliography is organized around the three main research questions. And then finally, we had 6 local case studies conducted by community partners in Toronto, Peel, Waterloo Region, and London. This is really on the ground. A really on the ground product using an evidence-based approach, and telling and sharing stories about what's gone on in faith and settlement partnerships in these local areas. There are a bunch of different reports that are on the Center for Community-Based Research's website on the Faith and Settlement Partnerships Project page. If you're interested in looking at any more of the details, whether that's the survey summary report, literature review, or the local case study. So there's lots of pieces there. And if you're thinking about facilitating a workshop yourself, we think that that's a great place for you to start so that you get more information and awareness as to what the big picture is around faith and settlement partnership. The second year of the project has culminated in us doing an executive summary, so taking all that research and bringing it into something that's digestible and easy for people to take away. But then within this mobilization as well is creating this workshop guide and this toolkit so that people can feel empowered and given the information they need to facilitate workshops within their own context. Faith and settlement partnerships are very, very context dependent. And so creating a workshop around this is meant to enable others to do this because they're the experts in their context, but to give resources and tools to help better shape
that. In terms of our vision for this, there are 3 things we want to highlight here for you. And 2 of them, Chris already mentioned something in terms of the progression between the research and the guide. So the first one is we wanted people both within faith-based or faith-informed organizations and settlement organizations, and those who are kind of in between those 2 worlds, to get a sense of what the experience of each other is in the process of settlement, of helping families or individuals settle in Canada. So what they are going through, what's going through their minds, what are the motivations, their concerns, the things that make it easier for them or more difficult to participate in a partnership. So we wanted to kind of give you a sense of what each other is thinking. That's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of our vision really is just creating something that was replicable. It will not be good for us to create something that needs a lot of infrastructure, that needs someone who knows this in detail, this research in detail, to be able to replicate it. We wanted to have a tool that people could use in their own context with what they know and what they know best, which is what happens around them in their specific local areas. So that goes to the third element of our vision really is we want to make something that is adaptable, that gives you a structure, that gives you a sense of direction of how to guide people to further or new existing partnerships or create new ones. But we want to allow everyone to fill in the blanks with the information that your own context, your own experience is giving you.
All right, so coming into our key terms, and just to let you know in terms of questions, we're going to have time for any questions, respond to any questions that come up in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, I've already got one, feel free to ask them in the chat bar, and then we will respond to them after this section. So coming into some pieces around some key terms within this project. So we've got 4 different key terms. Because faith and settlement partnerships is a very specific topic, we need to kind of work on our terminology to make sure that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about faith, we talk about settlement, and we talk about partnerships. So within settlement organization, we've got 4 definitions. We've got settlement organization, we've got faith-based organization and group, we have partnership, and then we have faith and settlement partnership. We outline the different definitions within the workshop guide. But people might find themselves in different places. They might find themselves somewhere along the spectrum between being a settlement organization and being a faith-based organization group. So it's important to recognize that these definitions aren't meant to be restrictive, but the hope is that these guidelines can further help people situate themselves within this range of faith and settlement partnership.
Now, in terms of our primary audiences, another disclaimer here: these audiences that we're going to see listed here, these groups or kind of clusters of groups that we are mentioning, are the ones that we encounter either through our own partners in our research or through their connections, through the people that we interviewed in the case studies, the people that we surveyed. But that doesn't mean that this is an exhaustive list of possible organizations that will benefit from this guide. We categorize them in faith-based organizations and groups, and the second part in like settlement. Some of them are cross-listed. We acknowledge that as well. But we just wanted to kind of give you a sense of the type of organizations that will benefit from this, the type of organizations that will have people in them that will be asking the same questions that we asked. So we have on the faith side of things, we have a religious congregation, which is it has a geographic area, is a particular group, is a temple, is a synagogue, is a church. The second one there in the list is a faith-informed NGO. So any organization that has emerged out of a faith tradition and has some social justice objective to it, that could be part of this. Faith groups, so anything more informal than a congregation, people coming together to sponsor that, not within a formalized church, but inspired by a faith mandate. A congregational coalition, so different congregations coming together to do this type of work. In many cases, this is within the same faith tradition, and in other cases, it's ecumenical or interfaith, so it goes beyond that. We work with both of them in our research. We are acquainted with those structures, but they again look very differently in different contexts. We have the Interfaith Council of Peel is just a group of people coming together to dialogue and to work on advocacy, but there are other groups that do more frontline work as well. And then the last one that we added here was community cultural organizations. Not every organization that is on this kind of side of the divide has a faith-based or faith-inspired mandate, but maybe a cultural and ethnic mandate, some ethical core to them that it compels them to do this kind of work. So this toolkit, this guide will work for them as a tool. Then the second list here is just, it's easier to identify, in a sense, the organizations on this side of the divide. So local immigration partnerships, government-funded settlement agencies, sponsorship agreement holders, many of whom are faith-based. So they have legs on both worlds, in a sense. Then the government itself, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, in like local areas or at a higher level as well. And organizations from other sectors that happen to be connected to settlement because of the work that they do in their area. We're thinking here housing, mental health, children aid, like any of those organizations that somehow will connect to settlement through the work that they do through referrals, and may have in them one or two people who are the liaison between settlement and their own mandate. They will benefit from this toolkit greatly. And just the last thing here, I already called your attention to this at the beginning. Just know that this is not an exhaustive list. This is not all the organizations that you can imagine. There are more. They might look slightly different in different local areas. They might be called slightly different. Like, go with your own sense when you replicate this, when you try to use this toolkit. Just work with those in your community who are asking the same questions that we are going to ask you later, or that we're going to present to you later in the webinar. So know that this is open, that you can fill in the blanks here, and that you can make this guide really yours that way.
Just to note that within this, that there's going to be a whole bunch of different people who would be interested in being participant within these workshops. There's faith-based and settlement-based people might be interested in this, for a whole wide range of leaders. We have a list of people who may be interested: religious leaders, policymakers, or practitioners, or other community stakeholders. And then people also have a various set of reasons for participating in this workshop as well. And you can see that within the guide itself, we give a whole list of reasons why people themselves, regardless of whether they've had a negative or a positive experience with faith and settlement partnerships, or they've had on-the-ground experience, or they think, hey, this might actually be a way to help work with some issues that we were facing in the settlement for one reason or another. So we just try to build the ground with a list of participants who may be in this, get a better idea as to who the audience is.
Now, regarding the process itself, we're getting closer to the actual workshops here. The first thing that I have to say is that whoever wants to facilitate this needs to be familiar with the research that with the research results. Why? Because there are many elements of it that require some reference to the research results, to just be able to answer some of the trickier questions that can come up during the workshops. So I see here that we've shared with you in the chat box the links to the research project. So in that in that website, you will be able to find, as Chris mentioned it earlier, all the documents that we are posting. So all the different reports from the case studies, from the survey, the lead review as well, and summaries, and this guide will go up there as well. So just make sure that you've looked through that you have a handle in just some of the general themes that will be required for people to enter into these faith and settlement partnerships. So that's the first requirement of the process that we mentioned. In terms of the length and the structure of it, we've come up with a design that can be either fractioned into three different workshops done at different moments, or like a day long, a half day long experience that will involve all three workshops. So why do we do it that way? We wanted to give you the freedom to do the particular workshops within meetings that you hold. So if you're going to have a board meeting, if you're going to have a staff day, something like that, that you can take 40 minutes, 45 minutes out of that and do one of the workshops without feeling that you need to do all the three of them one after another. We do recommend that the workshops are done in less than a month between each other, so that if you're going to break them into three, that you don't let more than 3 months from start to finish. But we're leaving that up to you as well. Whatever works best with the people that are participating. You know the participants better than we would, so you know what they can handle, how they can, how much time you can request from them. So just know that ideally this is one movement from beginning to end, from workshop 1 to workshop 3, but that it can be split into 3. The first workshop is about identifying themes. This first workshop has a heavier kind of introductory part to it. There is a lot of information that is given to the participants there, and it concludes with a reflection about questions and concerns. We'll go into detail later about those workshops, so don't worry about it if you are not fully clear on what's happening here. But it's just to give you a sense of the flow. The workshop number 2 is barriers and enablers, and the structure of it is a little different from the first one. We have a lot more sharing at the beginning of the session, and then the input from the research results will come later on. And then the workshop number 3 is about sharing stories. So the structure of workshop 2 and workshop 3 is more similar. And our idea with workshop 3 is to bring to completion what the workshop number 1 created in terms of questions and concerns, and number 2 what it created in terms of enablers and barriers, and then allow people to build a cohesive experience around faith and settlement partnerships.
At this point, we're just coming into our final section before talking about the workshops themselves. So if you have any questions at this point or concerns, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and then we'll respond to them immediately after this last section here. And really the last thing to say is just some things around facilitator tips and how we go about in this workshop encouraging facilitators to take on workshops for themselves. Is we have a lot of different ways within this guide to give helpful points for facilitators. Especially, it's very possible that there's going to be people reading this who want to do a workshop who've never facilitated a workshop before. So it's important that they have the basics that they need in order to generate conversation, to be able to ask thoughtful questions, and to have ways to manage the room so that the workshops themselves can be successful. Now, there's some general pieces about listening more and talking less and managing the room. These are some basic facilitator tips that we offer. But then we go into more extensive detail in terms of advice about how to manage the room in the appendices. So you can see there, for more facilitator tips, the Appendix 2. If you click on that link, that takes you, we are on page 11 now, it takes you all the way down to page 31. And we borrowed this from the Blanket Exercise Facilitator Guide from the Christian Reform Center for Public Dialogue. Many thanks to Jeanette Romkema for sharing these resources, because they are fantastic for enabling people to conduct their own workshops. So we have a planning checklist. There's a lot of little mini details that you need to take care of when you're conducting your own workshop. Things about the environment itself and the setup and how the tables are managed and set up, to technology concerns, to things like distributing photo release forms, if that's something that's important. These are all things within the workshop guide itself that we seek to empower facilitators to manage for themselves. Depending on the context, some of these things might not might not be relevant for particular facilitators. However, it's still good to have that confidence underneath yourself that you're doing things in the way that that are best for the workshop to succeed. And within that, we've got pedagogical learning styles, a list of different participants and what they might look like, how to respond to them if they're taking over, or perhaps you might need to get them more engaged. Looking at these different types of learners is very valuable as a facilitator to have in your back pocket. So we have a list of 10 different learning styles here within the document itself. And then some more tips for effective facilitation. We go into more detail about asking open questions and encouraging discussion. As a facilitator, the role isn't to present all the information. We try to set up the workshop guide in a way where it takes the research and it doesn't require facilitators or even encourage facilitators to repeat verbatim what the research says, but to use the research as a tool to facilitate discussion. And that's important because I don't think people, especially these days, don't particularly want to be sitting there listening to a lecture for an hour about all these things within the research itself. Being a facilitator is taking what's relevant for the participants and adapting that so that it can be communicated in a way in which the listeners and the participants can understand, but then also creating a space for discussion to be created within that. Some of the ideas that come out in the workshop might have some sort of resistance. So we also offer some tips about how to minimize that. It might be even a sign of a good workshop that there is some pushback. So we want to prepare facilitators to be able to be prepared for that as well. And at this point, it's not looking like we have any questions in the chat bar. So I'm going to pass it back to Hector, and we're going to jump right into the first workshop.
Thank you, Chris. Just maybe the first thing that I want to mention, and we skipped over that earlier, is the structure of the group itself. And why we skipped through that, because we're going to encounter that a couple of times here through the workshops, is there are 3 types of activities that are going to happen within the workshops. The first one of them is input. So we are going to give people some of the information that we have in the research. The second one, small group discussion or some kind of reflection. And then the third one, the sharing, the reporting back to the group. Out of these 3, the second one, it may vary depending on the size of the group, and you'll be able to assess that in your own context. But we suggest that if you have a larger group, if you have a group of 25 more people, then that you break it into smaller groups and facilitate some discussion in the moments when we are supposed to be doing some reflection. If you have a small group, perhaps you don't want to break it into smaller groups. You want to allow people to chat with the person sitting next to them, or just every person present can just reflect in silence and write down in a notepad. Whatever format you feel works best. But we are suggesting a large group and small group format, and we divide that in terms of small group discussions or personal reflection. So here for workshop 1, just the goals of this workshop really is to break down some of the barriers that between the phase and settlement kind of angles of the equation. We want people to know, to put themselves in the shoes of the other, to understand the other's concerns, hesitations when coming together in a partnership. So because of that, we are going to ask them about to do a little kind of role play, to imagine themselves being the other and suggesting some questions and concerns. So we are allowing for a kind of a longer introduction in this workshop because we assume this is the first time people are going to see each other. Well, and some of them will be new to the group entirely, some of them will know each other from before, but we want them to give particular input at the beginning. So it's not only their name and the organization that they represent, but also their own experience of settlement. What brought them to that work, and what they consider important. What are the expectations for the workshop? How did they find out about it? All these things. We want to make sure that people are, in a sense, they are placed, that they understand where each other comes from before they start interacting, and that's part of what we're trying to promote here, a sense of trust. So that's why this introduction is really, really important. We are going to allow them to hear some of the input from shorter version of what we've given you today so far. So just a sense of the inspiration, the vision, the project of Faith and Settlement Partnerships itself, so that they know what to expect. And that introduction will launch into it just people starting to interact with each other, and then we'll allow them to hear a bit from their research for the first time. So the key learnings. So this is I'll hand it over to Chris to walk us through this part of it. But if ideally we're going to have a first input through the introductions, and then allow people to have some interaction, and then after that we'll hear from the research.
Yeah, so within each section, within each workshop, we give the facilitators some basic snippets that was found within the research. Now, if you have consulted the executive summary and the other documents, these are things that are going to be very familiar to you as a facilitator. And that's kind of the point. So we want the facilitator to feel grounded within this, and we give a whole bunch of information that they can have for themselves in terms of what are the points that they want to, or that are good for them to focus on. But one piece we try to encourage for the facilitators is not to read verbatim what the research results have conducted. Hector and I had an opportunity last week to pilot the first workshop at the Tyndale Intercultural Ministry Center in Toronto. We found that there was a lot of time where both of us were up there talking and just giving information, and that took away from the most fruitful part of the workshop, which is in the questions and the discussion and dialogue that were generated at the workshop itself. So we encourage you not to take all of these themes, for instance, and say verbatim every single one of them and every single point, but to use these to give more understanding and feedback to participants, so that they can understand some of the larger themes. And they might bring these up themselves, and at which point you don't need to repeat things that participants have already said either. But these are themes that can go within the toolkit itself. Just to go back to the beginning here, so we encourage you to summarize the following overview of the major themes. And the major themes that came out throughout the research were around exploring differences, sharing stories, advocacy, culture shift, and formalizing partnerships. Those were 5 of the major themes. I'm not going to go into too much detail about those here. Those are things that can be checked out on the project page itself. But we also offer handouts that you can hand out to participants as well, so that there's less of a need to try to get all the information in that you need to. As you can see down on page 28 here, we have a handout of the major themes that offers a bit of a basic outline for where the discussion is going to be directed. Here we are. So within presenting this information, the whole hope is to encourage participants to reflect, discuss, and take notes of what they consider most significant from these research results and to bring them into their own experience. That's the hope of the workshop, is not learning for learning's sake, but to bring it in to the experience of the participants and the context that they find themselves in. Then after the research results are presented, they'll ask the participants to gather and share the results from their reflection and discussion. And then this is where the facilitator, the opportunity to take notes at the front of the room using a whiteboard or paper to bring back the shared knowledge of the group as they've heard the research results. Within that, it comes that you can take the research results and introduce the following exercise, which actually I'm going to pass back to Hector to explain.
Thank you, Chris. And I have something else to say about the themes, and you may be able to judge according to your own audience what themes are key or more important for you to delve into, to dedicate more time to. Maybe there are some that you just pass over necessarily, but just read through them quickly or highlight them. But there are others that are more relevant to you. So feel free to use that information as you see fit. Then after people have been given that opportunity to get some of that feedback from the research, and then they've given their own feedback back to a larger group. As Chris said, having whiteboards or flip chart paper is key to this. One of the things that happened last week in our trial run is that we used two boards. And Chris was writing in one, and I was writing in the other one, and it was just coincidental that we started writing that way, and that was one of the things that people reacted the best, in the best way towards, because they enjoy seeing the information app and having two different people writing it, just making sure that their own comments were acknowledged and honored that way. And now, in terms of the exercise that concludes this first workshop, is about the questions. What are their questions? That's really the title of it. We're asking people to kind of situate themselves on one side, either faith or settlement. I know it will be more difficult for some of you. I see some of you here. A place like World Renew, that is a sponsorship agreement holder that has a faith-based motivation, is on both sides. But for the sake of the exercise, we are asking people to imagine that they are placed on one side and they are trying to come up with the questions and concerns of those who are on the other side of it. So when you enter into a partnership, you know what your concerns are, but try to imagine what their concerns are, their hesitations, their fears maybe, and I'm sure you can come up with a much longer list than what I can give you. But last week already we heard some of it on the side of settlement, fear of losing funding, or fear that the faith-based organizations will proselytize. On the other side of the faith-based organizations, that they are not going to be able to work with their own mandate. So we heard a lot of that, and I'm sure depending on your local area, you will hear different things. And then after you allow people to have the discussion or reflection and come up with those questions, again, report to the group and close this workshop with just like a summary of it. Just making sure that people know where they stand at the end of the workshop, and also that you get a sense of how they felt about the exercise. That is important, and encourage them to go and review the materials as well. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a reminder from Chris that we need to speed the process along. So I'm going to move maybe into the exercise of the second workshop. So here in page 17, this is about barriers and enablers. This workshop starts with less content, and it goes kind of right into just a brief introduction. If you are not doing the workshop side by side. And if you are doing them right after another, you don't need this at all. You can just ask the question about what are the barriers or enablers of a partnership, and follow the same structure of the exercise in question 1, in terms of allow people to have time to reflect and discuss, and then report back to the larger group with notes being taken by the facilitator.
And so for this second workshop, the first act of the workshop, we focus more on major themes. And within this workshop, we're going to focus a lot more on the barriers and enablers. And within the research itself, there came a lot of different barriers and enablers that people have found within this work. Now, within both sections, we wanted to be able to list the barriers, but then offer a potential response to these barriers. When someone says, well, there's the fear of motives of faith groups, for instance. Well, the response might say, well, this is a legitimate concern. However, for instance, if the worry is around proselytization of newcomers, many faith groups are already working on cracking down on volunteers who might be going in that direction, or encouraging their volunteers to reflect more of a hospitable outcome in terms of their faith. There's lots of different ways in which these barriers can be overcome, but it's also important as a facilitator to be given the resources to encourage, when you get some pushback about, well, how is this possible, to encourage participants to think about the multiple realities that are happening on the ground. So we have that list of barriers. We have a list of 9 that are within the guide itself. And then we also have a list of enablers as well, and responses to those enablers as well. Get the sense of the nuance and the complexity within this. So chances are pretty good that within the discussion, a lot of these barriers and enablers will already come up. So as a facilitator, it's important to highlight the ones that haven't been given attention to, or to fully flesh out ideas that haven't been fully expanded. So after presenting these barriers and enablers, and similarly to the other one, there's a handout in the appendices section that lists the different barriers and lists the different enablers. You're going to have the group discuss the points that they find interesting, what was familiar, what was surprising, similarities and differences between what was coming up in discussion and what was in the research itself. And that will take you right into the end of the second workshop as you provide a summary and again reflect to people what they experience and ask them to describe what they experienced in the workshop.
Okay, now moving on to the third workshop, and perhaps something else to say about the concluding exercise of the previous one, which will be similar to the concluding exercise of workshop number 3, is that we want people to have the opportunity to compare their own experience and the research results. So they are not being only presented the research results as a way of guiding them in a particular direction. No, just to react to it. If they don't agree with it, if their experience is completely different, that needs to be voiced throughout the workshop. And I'm sure people will not be afraid of mentioning it. So if you created the safe space for them to share their thoughts, you'll hear that throughout. And in terms of the third workshop, sharing stories, this is a way just to bring the knowledge that has been like gathered throughout the first and second workshop together. So it's now not anymore about the questions and concerns or about what facilitates of that or doesn't facilitate partnerships, but it's about building a promising practice in a sense to share the stories that from beginning to end tell you that you know it was a good experience of partnership. So we're asking them at the beginning through the exercise to to share the success stories. Again, if the workshop is done right after workshop number 2, no introductions are needed. If you're doing it a week, 2 weeks later, you'll need some introductory work. Even if there are people who know each other, you always kind of need to situate yourself and everybody in the room. Every group is different, even if you're just missing one person or adding one extra person to it. And then with the success stories, just same kind of exercise. You're asking people to reflect or discuss what their own success stories are, what they look like, what their own context say about those stories, and then to share it with the group. For this workshop is particularly relevant, the use of the whiteboards, the highlighting words, key terms from those stories of success that will be able to speak to people as they are sharing their own local stories. You want to highlight those words that are that connect one story to another, that create that idea of we could further our partnerships with that element or with this element, or we've been doing this wrong, we could do it better, or whatever format it takes. Just make sure that these stories are kind of represented in what you report. And I'll just pass it on to Chris here with the stories of success.
Yeah, so we brought together 5 stories that came out in the research and from amongst our partnership itself as five examples of how these stories come together, just to give a little bit more concreteness to what we're talking about when we say faith and settlement partnership. But there's a whole range of what these stories could look like, and within the room there's going to be different levels of stories and experiences that they have that they share. So the stories that we have are highly contextual. So it's important to use them more as starting points for the discussion than actually using them as this is the way that you need to do it, or this is the way that you need to repeat it. So within these stories, it's meant to start the conversation and enable people to reflect on their own experiences. Which again, after presenting the research, the participants will be asked to say points they find interesting in the stories that were shared, what was familiar, what was surprising, and similarities and differences between their own experiences. One thing also to note as well, that there is a companion PowerPoint that will be uploaded as well, that will give the facilitator slides that will enable them to work through these different sections as well. That way, facilitators don't have to prepare that themselves if they want, and then that's something that's used at the starting as well. Then, following the same structure as the other couple workshops, thanking people for coming, providing a summary of the workshop, and then asking people to reflect on what they've learned over the course, maybe not just of the 3rd workshop, but over the whole 3 hours that they've been together. And then at the end, also encouraging partnerships or participants to continue looking and engaging with the partnership resources and to explore the reports. That's the majority of it for the 3 workshops. But within the guide itself, we've got more resources here as well. So I mentioned before about the handouts. If you keep scrolling down through the document, get into the handouts specifically for the major themes and the barriers and enablers. And then we move into the appendices, which this is a memoranda of understanding template that was adopted from a template given by Adrisa Pandit of Muslim Social Services in Waterloo Region. So many thanks to her for her contribution on this. Just when it comes to that question of whether to formalize partnerships, whether to leave them informal, a memoranda of understanding can be really beneficial for formalizing partnerships themselves, to get things in writing and to make sure that each party knows what their responsibilities are, what their range are, and to establish a healthy set of boundaries for the partnership itself. I mentioned earlier about having additional facilitator tips, and we've already gone through that, so I won't spend any more additional time on that. We've got links to some additional relevant organizations with more information that's worth checking out. A lot of these are partners within this partnership group that was formed. And then we have a starting list in Appendix 4 of relevant scriptural passages, particularly if you're working more with the faith group, that might help as a facilitator starting to get into the conversation. Now, this again is not exhaustive. This is really meant as a starting point. It can be difficult to understand with different faith groups what are relevant scripture passages for different ones. And then also recognizing that there's a whole variety of different faith traditions that may not necessarily be represented within these scriptural passages. So as you can see, we've got a list of different ones to at least get people started. And these are scriptural passages within the Abrahamic tradition that offer a starting point if that's the background. So at this point, this is pretty much sums up everything that we have in terms of presenting the workshop guide and the toolkit itself. The resources have been downloaded to the Center for Community-Based Research project page. So if you click on the link and you go to the project page, the resources, you can see a link to the workshop facilitators guide in PDF form and also the workshop guide slides in PowerPoint form as well. So they're accessible for you to use and to take into your own communities if you so need. But at this point, I'd also just like to ask if there's any user questions or concerns for people who are participating live in the webinar at this moment.
Perhaps while people are writing some questions, just two thoughts about this. The first one, and it just dovetails with what Chris was just saying. These documents are really public documents now. We want to make sure that you feel free to use them, to print them, to send them around. We want them to really reach the communities that need them the most. So please feel free to do that. And then the second part of it, and we've seen this through all the layers of development of our project. From the interviews to the survey to the trial run of this workshop guide, people they yearn for a venue to talk about these things, and I'm sure many of you already know it, but as you encounter them, as you give them the opportunity to start the conversation, is fascinating what you hear from them. So we were very pleased last week with a number of questions that were brought up in the context of that trial run.
Well, it doesn't appear that we have any questions at this time, so I just want to send a thank you to everyone who has joined us for this webinar launch of our toolkit and workshop guide. And repeat again that these are resources that are now public. They are now on the Center for Community-Based Research project page, and we encourage you to look through them and share them widely as well. This webinar will also be available within a week, as we've been recording this as well. So if someone you know might have missed out or feels like that this is something that might be relevant to them, we'll definitely be making this available as well on the project page. So thank you to Hector, my co-presenter, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a good rest of your day, and best of luck to you as you continue considering what faith and settlement partnerships look like in your community and in your context, and hopefully these resources will be helpful for you. All right, take care.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a good afternoon.